Hey everybody, it's Eric from EPAutos.com, your libertarian car guy. You may have caught the news, which I consider to be both happy and interesting news, that Hyundai has decided to indefinitely postpone, i.e. to cancel, the U.S. launch of the EV4, which would have been Hyundai's so-called entry-level electric vehicle and the so-called affordable mass market electric vehicle that we've been hearing about for, gosh, I don't know, the past decade at least. At any rate, they said when they were talking about bringing this thing out that its base price would be about $35,000. And that kind of took my breath away, and maybe it's taking your breath away too, because this seems to be the new bar for what constitutes, air fingers quotes, affordable. $35,000 for a basic little sedan. And it's just kind of a metric of the hallucinatory, delusional nature of the car industry right now, where they think that $35,000 is essentially, entry level, affordable. So, it's not primarily about the whole electric vehicle thing, though that's an aspect of it. It's about the kind of tone deafness of the vehicle manufacturers themselves, and I think that this is a function of the fact that, the people who are the decision makers at major automakers are people who are so affluent, and I'm not making some kind of communist harangue. I'm the farthest thing from that. I'm just pointing out that car company CEOs these days make more money than car CEOs ever used to make. For example, just shifting gears a little bit over to General Motors, the current CEO of GM, Mary Barra, she's compensated to the tune of nearly $30 million annually. That's a big number. You go back to the 1960s when GM was at its apogee, and Chevrolet alone, just Chevy, the division, by itself, had more market share than all of General Motors has today. And GM itself, including all of its divisions, had about half the U.S. market share of the new car market, if you can imagine that. The CEO at that time was paid just a fraction of what the current CEO is paid. So while he was making a lot of money, he was certainly an affluent guy. He didn't live in an alternate universe like some of them live today. So I think that's part of the problem. Now, getting back to the EVs, I think they've got a multifaceted problem that transcends just the fact that $35,000 is not affordable. The $7,500 tax rebate thing, a lot of people point to that and say that that is the reason, or one of the major reasons, why EVs are not selling anymore. I don't think there's a lot of truth to that, frankly, because something that most people aren't aware of is that they didn't give that tax rebate to just anybody. You had to have paid a lot in income taxes to qualify for it. Effectively, you had to be affluent. Working and even middle income people generally did not qualify for that. So essentially it was a perk for very affluent people who wanted to buy an EV, chiefly probably because they were either early adopters, they liked the idea of it, or there's truth to the assertion that they wanted to signal their virtue and show how forward-thinking they were, how much they cared about climate change and all of that stuff. But when you take that away, and then you add to the fact that EV ownership is a hassle. This is something that I've been writing about for years, and it's finally kind of seeped out and penetrated into the general consciousness. It's a hassle to have to constantly think about charging your vehicle and how much charge you've got left and how long you're going to wait to get charged. Now, affluent people haven't got time for that in particular. I think that's one of the perks of being affluent, isn't it? That you get to the head of the line, so to speak. When you buy, or if you can afford to buy, a first-class airplane ticket, you don't have to stand in the cattle queue with everybody else. They will let you sit in a nice lounge somewhere, and they'll let you board first, and you deplane first, and all of that. And with regard to EVs, it's not very pleasant to have to sit at a Sheetz for 20 to 30 minutes with the hoi polloi, while a guy like me driving a 24-year-old truck can just fill his tank up in 3 minutes and be back on the road. So, I think the totality of it, when you take away the $7,500 tax rebate, you add the hassle factor, and also that electricity has gotten to the point where the cost is at par with fueling up a vehicle, and it's just gotten to the point where even affluent people aren't really interested that much in electric vehicles anymore. And then here's the the big take-home point. In order for them to mass market a so-called affordable EV to the people who don't qualify for the $7,500 rebate, it needs to actually be affordable, and $35,000 isn't. And even if you added or subtracted $7,500 from that, even if the rebate were available to working and middle-class people, you're still talking about $27,500 for something like the EV4, and that's pretty expensive. Go back 5 years and it was still possible to buy a new car for $20,000 or less. There aren't any $20,000 cars on the market anymore. So, now they have ratcheted things up to the point where you're supposed to consider a $27,500 car, again, assuming that tax rebate, as affordable. And it's just not for, people who make $50,000 a year, $60,000 a year. I think that currently the average family income in this country is around $60,000. So, a $35,000 vehicle is a non-starter. And, with regard to the EV thing, it's even more of a non-starter when, the cost of electricity is about the same. I wrote an article about that. The New York Times had some coverage about that, fueling up or charging up an EV costs you about the same, particularly if you use a fast charger, as it would to gas up a current typical compact size crossover SUV. So, what's the point? Now you're paying more for the vehicle, you're paying about the same for the electricity, and then you're paying the time cost. So no wonder, Hyundai has decided to cut bait before suffering the embarrassment of putting this thing out there, making a big hullabaloo about how marvelous it is, as VW did, for example, with that ID Buzz microbus reboot, and as Dodge did with the electric charger, and just having these things sit there on dealer lots all year long, not selling, very obviously not moving, taking up space, costing the dealer money, and then inevitably, we get to the end of the calendar year, it's the end of the model year, and next year's vehicles are coming, they're being shipped out, and the dealers got to get rid of the things that they've got in inventory. So, they just sell them at a loss just to get rid of them. And that's a great way to go bankrupt for the dealers, and ultimately, if it happens on a large enough scale, for the manufacturer. So, Hyundai did the smart thing and decided to just say, okay, we're not even going to bother with this thing. And good on them for doing that. I'm glad they're doing that. I'd like to see more of the manufacturers do that. And, more fundamentally, what I'd really like to see, I rant about this a lot, but I do it because I think it's important to rant about it. I would like to see at least one manufacturer advocate for or push back against the federal limits that make it very difficult to bring in truly affordable vehicles. I've talked many times about models like the Toyota Hilux pickup, the Champ that they sell in other markets, that goes for about $13,000. Yeah, it's simple, it's basic, but it's dirt cheap. $13,000. I'd certainly consider a Hilux if it were available to replace my 24-year-old truck. The reason I keep driving my 24-year-old truck chiefly is because there's nothing new that I'm interested in. It costs too much. I'm not spending $32,000, $33,000 on a vehicle, and then the insurance that would go along with it, and all of the other things. And I don't want a touchscreen. I don't want advanced safety technology and all the rest of it. I just want a basic, simple truck. I think a lot of people do. And I would love to see one manufacturer say, you know what, we're going to offer these things for sale because we think that that's what people want. I'd like to see Toyota do it chiefly because they have so many appealing models, but believe it or not, most of the other manufacturers do as well. If you're interested in that, have a look at what they're allowed to sell in Mexico. Just to cite one example of what you can look at. This idiot just walking along the road, literally walking in the middle of the road. Holy cow. Yeah. Anyway, sorry for that segue. More over at epautos.com. Thanks as always for listening, and we'll have more for you again soon.